What is happening, everybody? It is Thursday evening, which means we're going to break down Thursday Night Football from an owner's box perspective. We'll talk about the main slate and anything else that you guys want to talk about. You could ask me questions. Throw it into the YouTube chat. I'm always keeping an eye on it during these shows when I'm doing them by myself because, listen, I don't have a producer. I don't have a co-host with me. You guys essentially serve as my co-host when you guys ask me any questions, whether it's about the slate, bets, other information, whatever it might be. And also, we do have a deal going on right now at Stokastic for the holidays. If you use the promo code HOLIDAY, you could sign up for anything on the site for 25% off. You want access to our NFL package, 25% off. You want access to our NBA package, 25% off. So anything that you guys have been thinking about signing up for, sign up now for Christmas. Get yourself 25% off. Use the link below and promo code HOLIDAY. That's all capital letters and all one word, HOLIDAY. Other than that, what's happening, guys? We've got Thursday Night Football and only 2 Thursday Night Football games left this season, Rams and the Saints. So first thing I'm going to do here is start building some lineups in the contest generator. So part of our NFL package, it includes the contest generator and the Sims tool. So we could build our lineups on this site, and then we can simulate the lineups out on the site as well. So we're sponsored here by OwnersBox. If you guys haven't checked them out yet, they do have and I just realized I have the wrong overlay selected. So let me change that. Here it is. There we go. Sign up at OwnersBox. Get up to $500 bonus on your first deposit over at OwnersBox when you sign up. And now let's go, and I just signed myself out of here. All right, sign in. Sign in. We're off to an inauspicious start here, fellas. Let's go back to the contest generator and build the lineups again just restore it. Now we'll simulate them out. All right, so let's see. What is the contest over at OwnersBox tonight? And that will determine what I'm going to set as the percentage payout to first. It's usually 25% at OwnersBox. Let's see if that is still the case. And for tonight, it is 20% actually. All right, so 20% to first over on OwnersBox. And I'm going to have to build my lineups again. All right, so let's build lineups in the contest generator. Rerun that. We just had a data update here. So let's rerun everything from the top, and we're going to build out 10,000 lineups here. It's supposed to mimic about what the field is expected to do over on OwnersBox, and then we're going to simulate out the lineups that we've built, and that'll tell us which of those lineups are expected to be the most profitable ones, highest expected ROI. So we've got Rams and Saints tonight, and a couple things about OwnersBox that are notable. First of all, the main slate, it is SuperFlex, so you could play 2 quarterbacks, no need for a defense or anything like that. So we build lineups out for the main slate or the Saturday slate, which we'll do both on this show. That's going to be why you're going to see, hey, a lot of quarterbacks showing up in lineups and no defenses, which I approve of. I do not like defenses in DFS. And this is what we just got here for Thursday Night Football. So the max contest you could enter in this is 35. So let's favorite 35 lineups. And now let's also look at my overall top projected lineups. What is the top projected lineup giving me in the Sims for tonight's game? We've got Matthew Stafford, Derek Carr, Jamal Williams, Foster Moreau, and Kyron Williams. So Matthew Stafford there in that multiplier spot. I assume Kyron Williams is going to be the most popular player in the multiplier spot on OwnersBox. We'll see when we look through some of the other projections here in a second. So these are sorted by simulated ROI. If you guys are wondering why simulated ROI and not fantasy points, well, there's a lot that fantasy points miss. It doesn't include correlation. It doesn't include things like ownership. So I like to build my lineups in the Sims tool and have them rated based on what is the expected return on those lineups as opposed to how many fantasy points they're projected to score. Because if you see here, when I sort these lineups by fantasy points, as opposed to by ROI, of the lineups on screen here, only like one of my top 20 highest projected lineups from a fantasy point perspective is actually one of my top ROI lineups. So that is why I don't really think that fantasy points is the best way to go and build your lineups. There should be other things you're considering as well. One thing that is interesting here, because I just sorted my lineups by dupes, which is also something you should be considering for one game slate, is your lineups. How unique are they? Because there can be a lot of overlap in lineups, is if you look here, almost none of the heavily duped lineups are making it into my top ROI lineups. However, the one that is projected to have the most dupes which is Matt Stafford, Shaheed, Derek Carr, Tyler Higbee, Puka Nacua, this lineup construction actually still does work its way into one of my top 35 lineups, even though it is expected to be duped as many times as it is. So just something interesting that I kind of notice here. One thing you could do is if you're building lineups and you start getting to one that's getting duped a bunch, maybe you want to be a little bit more unique. Well, the difference in simulated ROI between this lineup and this lineup over here, it's very minimal, right? This one is a simulated ROI of 34.7%, but then we have this one that's only expected to be duped once, has a simulated ROI of 32.7%. So one thing I think is pretty reasonable to do with some of these really heavily duped lineups is just unselect it, and you can play a comparable one for a similar projected simulated ROI, and that's the way that you can make your lineups at least a little bit more unique if you win. So that's something that I don't mind doing if you're going to make some manual adjustments here within the Sims. Shout out to OMG Lols, who says LMAO, light crowd, I see. Yeah, the people, they're working their way in, OMG Lols. They're slowly working their way into the show. And as you guys do, feel free to leave me a question in the YouTube chat and like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. But OMG Lols, the YouTube chat is yours. You could dictate the whole show by asking me questions if you wanted to. Let's look at some of these exposures. And the first thing I'm going to do is filter by the captains that I'm getting to. And we'll see which players I'm getting to the most in the multiplier. And OMG Lowell says, I see the trickle. Yeah, it's a very slow trickle. This is not breaking the seal on drinking half a pack of Coors Lights. This is a very, very slow trickle. Very slow. Captain exposures. These are the players I'm getting to the most in the captain for tonight. Starting with Matthew Stafford and then followed by Kyren Williams. And yeah, like I expected, Kyren Williams is the most popular player in the multiplier spot, although not quite as big of a gap as I thought he was going to have. Reese project for 21.1% ownership in the multiplier spot compared to 19.9% for Cooper Kupp. I thought this was going to be a situation where it'd be like 30% of Kyren Williams or something like that we were projecting in that multiplier spot, but actually only 21.1%. So I'm about even with the field on Kyren Williams, and I actually came in well underweight to the field on Cooper Kupp, who earlier in the day when I was building lineups for FanDuel and for DraftKings, for those sites, I actually was getting to more of Cooper Kupp than the field where he was a little bit more contrarian. Not quite the case for OwnersBox tonight. Other players in the multiplier spot that I'm getting to, overweight to both the quarterbacks, Matt Stafford and Derek Carr. Them together are equaling north of 40% of my lineups and not projected for all that much ownership either, relatively to what we would expect for a quarterback, right? 16.7% for Stafford, only 9.5% for Derek Carr. And I know he hasn't had all of the best performances as of late, but there's a clear ceiling for Derek Carr because if we go ahead and look at some of his passing attempts, if my other computer would cooperate with me here we go. So Derek Carr, he's had some recent games where we've seen Carr with 50-plus pass attempts. I actually think there was a point in time, I believe there was 3 games in a row that we saw Derek Carr with north of 50 pass attempts. But I'm pulling up his game log right here, and it was 2 games with north of 50 pass attempts. So this was back in October. He had a game against the Texans where he had 50 pass attempts and 353 passing yards. Game against the Jaguars, 55 pass attempts for 301 yards. And some recent games, what's happened? Back-to-back blowout wins for the Saints in games that Derek Carr has played. And against the Giants, they win 24-6. Not a real need for Derek Carr to throw the football a whole bunch. Against the Panthers, they win that game 28-6. So in neither of those games did Derek Carr really have to drop back and throw the football a ton, but we've seen the ability for him to have to throw the football that often. The Saints have been willing to do it in games where they've been trailing. So in a game tonight on the road against the Rams, I do think it sets up to be a little more favorable for a pass-happy game script for the Saints. So that's where I do think it makes sense that we're getting to about double the field of Derek Carr in that multiplier spot. Also a little bit overweight here to Puka Nacua. And Nacua we do have coming in with quite a bit less ownership than Cooper Kupp, about half the ownership in that multiplier spot. So if that's going to be the case on OwnersBox, which it looks like it is, I think that really, really makes sense as a good way to get some leverage. Play Puka Nacua in that multiplier spot as opposed to Cooper Kupp. If it's Nacua who catches touchdowns and has a big game, that's going to be coming from Kupp. Colin O'Callahan says, can we talk about Taysom Hill? Price on OwnersBox seems low. Yeah, let's go ahead and look at the flex spots right now and see what it is that I'm getting from Taysom Hill, if anything. And yeah, he is, so a couple things here. Actually, more than a couple. A few things to note here, Colin. And it's an astute point that you bring up because Taysom Hill is actually showing up as one of the best contrarian plays that we have on OwnersBox. Only project for 14% ownership, and he made it into 25.7% of my top lineups. He's very cheap. We don't project him that great, right? We're only projecting him for 5.68 fantasy points. But at this low of a projection, that's still enough for me to get to him in a quarter of my lineups and well overweight to the field. So, well, why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. Most notably is that projections aren't just a hard number in terms of what we're expecting fantasy points from a player. It's also, and this is included in the Sims, it's a range of outcomes. And this is the average of those range of outcomes. But Taysom Hill is a player with touchdown equity. He has touchdown upside. How often do we see this with the Saints? Kamara got tackled inside the 5-yard line. What happens? Taysom Hill ends up touching the ball. He ends up being the one who scores the touchdown. So I think that when we're looking at Taysom Hill, not somebody that I've historically loved to play on showdown single game slates, but he is so cheap on OwnersBox, to Colin's question here, that if he scores the touchdown, he's fairly likely to be optimal, to be in a winning lineup. And we know there's a lot of touchdown equity in Taysom Hill. So I like him quite a bit as a contrarian play. Good call out there by Colin O'Callahan in the chat. So Taysom Hill, somebody who we are going to like getting to. As for the players who I'm getting the most exposure to overall in the flex spot, Puka Nacua, Tyler Higbee, Chris Olave, these are all players that I have 40+% exposure to in that flex spot. And what's noticeably missing from here? Not a lot of the running backs, right? We're not getting to a lot of Kyren Williams, not getting to a lot of Alvin Kamara. And is that something we should feel comfortable with? Maybe not, but we're thinking about this from a tournament perspective. And if we're going to be seeing a lot of ownership going to Alvin Kamara and Kyren Williams, I think one of the more reasonable ways to get leverage and to pivot is going to be to focus on the passing games today. So we're overweight to Matt Stafford and overweight to Derek Carr in those captain spots. And then also, if we look at some of our flex ownership, a little bit overweight to Derek Carr in the flex spot, a little bit underweight to Stafford in the flex spot. But keep in mind, that's partly because of how overweight we are to him in that multiplier spot. So I like focusing on the passing games for the Saints and the Rams tonight. Good way to differentiate some lineups. Other players that we're getting to as well. Some Rashid Shaheed, although underweight to him. Same with Foster Moreau. These are guys who are expected to be quite popular for today. So let's sort by leverage. Who are we most underweight to? All right, so underweight to Juwan Johnson, who's expected to be really popular. Instead, we're getting to like Taysom Hill at a similar price point for less ownership. Underweight to Foster Moreau, so both the tight ends that we're underweight to. A little bit underweight to Shaheed, underweight to Kyren Williams, slightly underweight to Kamara as well. And then who we're overweight to on the flip side, overweight to Taysom Hill, overweight to Olave, Tyler Higbee, Jamal Williams, although partially it's because he's just solo owned at 15%. So also overweight to A.T. Perry, who's extremely cheap. There's a handful of cheap options we could look at. The ones that are standing out the most to me here for cheap and low ownership, Taysom Hill, A.T. Perry, and then a little bit of Lynn Bowden as well, about even with the field on him. But still, those are three guys that are projected for low ownership that we could definitely use to differentiate some lineups. See what we got in the YouTube chat here. This is from Jason Swing. Greg is one of the hardest working men in DFS. I appreciate it, Jason. Appreciate it. So, and you don't even get to see the bulk of what I do. You only get to see what I do on camera, which is fun for me. This is my favorite thing to do, is be on camera. But then there's a lot of planning that goes into this and organizing stuff and trying to figure out like SEO and graphics and all of that. But yeah, so this is like the final version of what I go and do. And I appreciate you guys for supporting it. Then OMG Lowell says it's not easy gassing up Lindquist. Tell me about it. It's the although I don't really gas him up all that much. I prefer to tear him down. Although there is an argument to be made that if I gassed him up more, it means I could pull him down even harder, right? Because if we're trying to push him off a ladder, it's really more fun if he's on the 5th rung of the ladder than the 3rd rung. So OMG Lowell, I think there's a good point there. I probably should gas up Eric even more than I already do, because then the fall is even harder. And then Jason following up saying, we appreciate you. Happy holidays. Thanks, man. You too. And everybody have a good Christmas, New Year's next week. I'm still going to be here doing shows, by the way. I'm going to be doing an NBA show on Christmas with Josh Engelman. So if you guys are playing DFS for the holidays, this is what I'll be doing. I'll be here doing content. See if there's anything else notable about the Thursday Night Football game. I feel like we've kind of already covered what it is that I'm looking at from both a contrarian angle and then also captains. So let's go and build lineups. Let's do it for the Saturday slate, right? Let's look at the Saturday slate. We'll build lineups for it. Check out some of the exposure, look at the top projected lineups, and then I'll also do it for Sunday if we have time after this. Sound like a plan? Sounds good to me too. Sounds good to me too. All right, while this is simulating out, let me look for some bets today. What is projecting well for us in Odd Shopper for Thursday Night Football? See what it is that's showing up. Going to sim these lineups out now for Saturday. Go 20% to first, run the sim. All right, so Thursday Night Football. What is projecting well tonight? By the way, a couple of deals that we have going on the site right now. If you guys are checking out Odd Shopper, you could sign up using the promo code GIFT, and that will get you 33% off. But if you want to sign up and get access to any package at Stokastic, we do have a promo code for that as well for the holidays, promo code HOLIDAY, and that'll get you 25% off anything you sign up for the first time. Let me look to see what's projecting well for NFL Thursday Night Football. Let's see. Anything that I really, really like that's standing out to me. This isn't Thursday Night Football, but I do like Wemby under 13.5 rebounds. Just a really high number for Wemby. One other bet. Oh, here's a Thursday Night Football. That makes sense to me. Tyler Higbee is an over-under of 22.5 receiving yards. There's a handful of books that are posting 22.5 for today. And that's a very low number for me on Tyler Higbee, especially now that Stafford is back and healthy again, where we saw Stafford banged up for a little bit there. And Higbee also was somebody who himself was banged up for a little bit. But when Tyler Higbee's been healthy, we've seen him have a good amount of success with Matt Stafford. So if we look at some of the targets in recent games that Higbee has played, 5 targets, 4 targets, 5 targets. In all of those games, he had 29 or more receiving yards. So we look at the total here for Higbee, over under 22.5 receiving yards. I think that's a pretty good bet. We have that projected as the top bet of the day for Thursday Night Football in Odd Shopper. So if you guys are looking to take a stab on something, that's something that projects well for us. Over 22.5 receiving yards for Tyler Higbee. All right, so now looking at the Saturday slate. And actually, what is the max amount of entries for the Saturday slate? It is 47. So let's just go to 47 for this. Favorite 47 in the Sims tool. All right. So of the lineups I just built, there is one that's standing out above the others in terms of simulated ROI. This one has a 273.2 simulated ROI, whereas the next best lineup was 218. And this lineup, and keep in mind, this is SuperFlex, and the quarterback options suck for Saturday, right? Like, these are not good quarterbacks. We had, and I realized earlier, I kept thinking that Mitch Trubisky was going to be starting at quarterback for the Steelers with Kenny Pickett out again, but it's actually Mason Rudolph that they're down to now at the quarterback spot. So we've got 2 quarterbacks that we're presumably going to be playing in most of our lineups because this is SuperFlex. And there's only one good quarterback on the entire slate, and Josh Allen on Saturday. The rest of them are, I mean, Jake Browning's decent, but in general, this is not a great QB slate. So I'm interested to see what that means for our exposures. As for our top projected lineup, it does have Mason Rudolph and Josh Allen in it. So at the Steelers side of the game, it's Mason Rudolph, and he is paired with Jaylen Warren and Deontay Johnson. If you guys look over here, you can see what the stacking options are here. So we actually did get to a QB +2 on the Steelers side, and then QB +4 on the Bills side. It's going to be really difficult to not stack heavily on a 2-game NFL slate. So one side of the stack, just what mentioned the Steelers part, but then the other side, Josh Allen with Stephon Diggs, with Khalil Shakur, with Dalton Kincaid, and James Cook. James Cook is by far the best running back to roster for the Saturday games. So that's what our number 1 overall lineup looks like, and does project quite a bit better than everything else. I'm interested to see how much dupes are coming into play. And yeah, for main slates for NFL, we typically don't see that many dupes, but there's a bunch for tonight. There's a bunch, right? Because if we look at what we have for dupes here, and this is why none of them are showing up in our top lineups, these lineups are expected to be duped really heavily. The one that has the most dupes for Saturday is Jake Browning and Josh Allen as the QBs. That's not really all that surprising. Then James Cook, Jaylen Warren, T. Higgins, Deontay Johnson, Gerald Everett, Tyler Boyd, George Pickens, and Josh Allen. Todd Nieper wants to know best 4,500 utility for DK, please. Are you talking about for the showdown contest or for the main slate? Which slate are you talking about? Tell me which slate, Todd, and then I'll give you an answer once I have that information. Let's go ahead now and we already favored the top 47. So let's look at the exposures now for Saturday. And as I go, once again, any questions you guys have, you can throw them into YouTube. Let's go position by position. So let's filter here by QB to start. We filter by the quarterbacks, which there's only 4 of them to choose from. It's going to be SuperFlex. So that's why that we have north of 100% exposure to quarterbacks, because most of our lineups are going to have 2 of them. And nothing really massively surprising here. We're getting to a ton of Josh Allen. So is the field. Josh Allen, we've projected for 77% ownership on the Saturday slate. 77%. So our 74% is actually slightly underweight to the field in this build here. Mason Rudolph, there's only 2 contrarian QBs on this slate. Only 2 contrarian QBs. By the way, Whit Wilbert is asking me, am I a cuck? How did you know? Got me. Guilty. Whit Wilbert, he's a sharp one. He's figured it out in there. Yes, sir. OMG Lols then is asking about the Saints D for tonight. So I actually was when I was building lineups for DraftKings and FanDuel earlier. He was the Saints defense. I was getting to a decent amount of the Saints defense. Getting back to the quarterbacks for Saturday, Mason Rudolph, Easton Stick. These are the only 2 not projected for like a mass amount of ownership. 29% to Rudolph, 28.9% for Easton Stick. Our data does prefer Mason Rudolph. So if you're going to go to one of the contrarian QBs, I do think that Mason Rudolph is the one who makes a little bit more sense. And the next part of this then is Jake Browning, about even with the field on him. 50% for Jake Browning, 44% our exposure relative to the field. Nothing like crazy different that we're doing with these quarterback spots other than getting overweight to the field on Mason Rudolph. Let's look at the running backs now. If we go ahead and look at the running backs, let's see what we're getting to there. Now, also, we've got Colin O'Callahan says, how do you balance the dupes in NFL, knowing that they are popular and a lot of the time optimal? I assume you still want some, but it's always hard to tell the level. Yeah, so for me, that's where the Sims tool really comes into play, because I don't want to play a lineup in general that's going to be duped like hundreds upon hundreds of times. The reason being, especially for me, this is like a really clear example. I have had tournaments where I have won, I've come in first place, and I've lost money still on the slate because I dupe with so many people. So that's why some of those lineups, they are negative ROI because of how often they're duped. So that's the reason why. You don't want to play lineups that are duped all that frequently, and that is something that our Sims tool helps you balance, right? It helps figure out in a tournament setting, what is the expected ROI on these lineups based on how many times it's duped, and it still takes all that other information into account, right? So let's go back to the lineups for a second. If we look at the dupes here, and all of these factors are taken into account when calculating the simulated ROI, right? How often a lineup cashes, how often a lineup comes in the top 10, how often a lineup wins the tournament. But if a lineup wins a tournament and is duped a bunch of times, the amount of money that lineup makes in that run of the tournament ends up being lower. So it's all calculated into the simulated ROI. And that's the way that I think it makes the most sense to balance the difference between dupes, projections, the upside of a lineup, is just by looking at those lineups in a tournament simulated setting and trying to figure out from there what the best overall lineups you could build are. And that's also why if you look here at just projected fantasy points, because I know a lot of people just build their lineups based on, hey, here's what projects well. Well, if you look at our lineups that are favored here by top simulated ROI, if we sort by projected fantasy points, almost none of these lineups are actually the top lineups. Do they project well from a fantasy standpoint? Sure. But a lot of them are duped super heavily. So even if they win, you're splitting with a bunch of people. And then also it's not taking into account things like ownership and then things like how well the players correlate together. So those are things that are missing out when it comes to just looking at fantasy points. So that's the way I'd answer it. I think you should use something like a Sims tool or find another process to figure out like how do you balance the dupes versus everything else. And boy, Chad has gone off the rails in here. Trying to figure out if I'm if I'm a cuck, am I short, am I tall, am I skinny? So I'm skinny. I'm also in good shape. I work out every day. I'm not 6'1". It would be cool if I was 6'1". I'm not. Let's get back to the slate. And if you guys have questions about DFS, we can answer those as well. Or if you just want to ask me about how I got into cucking, yeah, that could come up in the chat as well. All right, let's look at the positions now. We already looked at QB. And now we'll go to running back. Running back positions, we are going to say the best overall running backs here that I'm getting to the most of. James Cook is in nearly 3/4 of my lineups. He's going to be very popular, but it makes sense. If you look at the projections we have on the running backs, there is a pretty big gap between James Cook and everybody else. So that's where the ownership really does make a lot of sense here. And then we've got Jaylen Warren at 12%, 12 projected fantasy points. We got Joe Mixon at 12, Austin Eckler at 10.72. And then if we go and look at the exposures we're getting to here, James Cook, 72.3% as our highest rostered running back. And then Jaylen Warren coming in next, 63.8. So a lot of people are going to be trying to figure out for Saturday, hey, do I want to roster Jaylen Warren or Najee Harris? Our data pretty clearly prefers Jaylen Warren over Najee Harris. He's going to be more popular, but it's for good reason. So I prefer Jaylen Warren. I do think he's the better running back with more upside between the two. About even with the field on Joe Mixon, hardly getting to any of Austin Eckler because I mean, it's tough, right? Because Eckler is somebody who's clearly still a very talented running back, but the situation for the Chargers is just shit. Easton Stick looks terrible. They're also kind of getting away from Eckler a little bit. They've been splitting his touches with Joshua Kelly, which they said is going to be the case going forward. And there is still a little bit of an expensive price tag on Austin Eckler, which makes it hard to prioritize him. Wide receivers that we're getting to. Getting to a lot of Tyler Boyd. And one thing that we have to note here is that not only are all the quarterbacks out on Saturday, but some of the wide receivers as well. Jamar Chase is out. He's not going to be playing for the Bengals on Saturday. So as a result, we're getting to Tyler Boyd, who's cheap. He's a really good looking value option, most overall rostered wide receiver for us. We're getting to a lot of T. Higgins as well. So 59.6% of Tyler Boyd, 40.4% of T. Higgins. We do have Higgins projected better, but Boyd is cheaper. So if there's a scenario where it's just like, hey, I only have one roster spot available for a Bengals wide receiver, price is an issue, which one should I roster? I'm going to tell you T. Higgins in that scenario as the guy to go to. So T. Higgins over Tyler Boyd if there is no salary constraints or anything like that. But if it's just which one do I get more exposure to, the answer does become Tyler Boyd. Stephon Diggs, I'm actually kind of surprised Diggs is only projected for 41.9% ownership given the lack of spend up options on the slate. So Stephon Diggs to Josh Allen, that's a very, very high priority stack for Saturday. Other wide receivers, I'm getting a lot of an overweight to. George Pickens and Khalil Shakur. Shakur's a good way to differentiate some of those Bills stacks. He's only projected for 27% ownership, so that is pretty modest for a 2-game slate. Let's go ahead and look at the leverage here. So a lot of these guys were players that were popping up towards the top. Pickens, Diggs, Shakur, Tyler Boyd. But who are we underweight to at wide receiver? Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis project for 16% ownership. So we're going to differentiate with the Bills wide receivers. Our data does prefer Shakur to Gabe Davis. And then nothing else really any kind of real crazy stands on. See what else we got going on in the chat here. People asking how much I bench. But I'm old, right? I'm not trying to bench anymore. I don't want to get injured. You got to be a little more risk adverse. So I do a lot of hit workouts. Patrick Lawrence said, Greg has consistently helped me make money. What the fuck have you done for anyone? Good point, Patrick. What has he done for anybody? And I've also made you laugh. So I appreciate that. Some good stuff there from Patrick. And then HAIASIOO. It's the point. He's living his dream and they hating. I'm having a good, I legitimately have a very good time every day. And I think that should be pretty apparent. If you guys watch the Live Before Lock show that I usually do at nights with Eric, I have fun. How many people are laughing that much while they're working? I have a blast every day. So wide receivers, not too much else to talk about. Let's hit on the tight ends and then we'll be right around done here. So the tight ends that we're getting the most exposure to, Dalton Kincaid, Gerald Everett, And that's kind of it. We're underweight to Freiermuth, underweight to Dawson Knox. We're looking to play a tight end from the Bills. I think the answer is going to be Dalton Kincaid. I mean, Kincaid's in 46.8% of lineups compared to just 4.3% of Dawson Knox. So that does it. That gives us a run through of the Saturday slate. I'm also going to be doing a Saturday live before lock with Neil Orfield. So Saturday, I believe the slate locks at 4:30 Eastern time. So from 3:30 to 4:30, I'll be breaking the slate down, covering everything. DraftKings, FanDuel, all that we'll be hitting on this Saturday show. So guys, thank you very much for watching. If you have not done it yet, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got all the holiday deals going on the site right now. Promo code GIFT for 33% off of OddsShopper. Use the promo code HOLIDAY to get 25% off any Stokastic membership. So go check those out if you guys have been considering signing up. For everybody who's in the chat, the haters and the supporters, I like you all the same. It's all engagements. I appreciate it. I do prefer when people are a little bit more positive in the chat, but it's all in good fun. I enjoy it. So guys, thank you very much for watching. Good luck tonight, and I'll see you back here on the YouTube streets tomorrow.